Call this meeting to order. Tonight, we're going to be led in the pledge by Mr. Scott Broden.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Broden. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight. This is our third budget meeting. Over the last week, Mr. Oldham and I have talked and in conversation tried to come up with, I asked him to try to get it down to at least 308, and tonight I think everybody's got a copy of what they're going to go over, and I think they, him and Mr. Sandvig and staff have did a little bit better than that. I've asked Mr. Oldham to bring everyone up to date with where we actually started to where we're at now. Not only, I think most of the board is aware of it, but I'd like the general public to let him bring the general public up to date. So, Mr. Oldham, I'm going to turn it over to you and Mr. Sandvig and take it from there.
Mr. Sandvig has principals submit budgets for their schools by the end of January, typically what we do. So we ask them to submit technology needs, other instructional needs, any particular things that they may need, their building that needs, typically they do repairs, through a regular system, but if there's other capital things that we want to look at. So they submit those. Jeff then starts working on that usually in February and puts together those needs along with the ones that we've identified from the central office at that point. And that first budget that we looked at that you really didn't see was about $317 million, something like that, as we began to look at it. The first one you saw was $314 million. And again, I think the public that's listening to us tonight or will be watching this, the legislature's in session. We're getting information over the news media kind of like you do at that time. The first one you saw was the $314 million. At that time, the governor was still saying 2% raise for every teacher, and we have to budget that even though that's a flow-through for us. We typically in Rutherford County, if our certified people get 2%, we try to do the same thing for our classified. That was 2%. So when that was in there for the governors, when he said he was not going to be able to do that, that really reduced your budget by something like $3.6 million. That 2% raise when you go through. You saw another figure was close to, it was $309,978,000, $310 million roughly. And at that time, 2 buses had been removed, 27 and a half teachers, you may remember that. We've told special education there's a psychologist that retired. We wouldn't be replacing that right now. We've worked with individual schools based upon their preliminary enrollment numbers. In some cases where somebody retired, if we could handle it with pupil-teacher ratio and all, we may not have filled that position right now. We're holding it to see. So that kind of got us to the 310. 38, was, again, some minor adjustments in that. What you're seeing, and you never did really see 138, but we had kind of gotten to that point internally and looking at what we could do further. Where tonight you're going to see one's about $306.7 million, basically, and we have some cuts that I'll discuss with you, and then I'll just kind of point out some things with you. So what overall did we do really to come from that 310 all the way down to try to get to 306.7? Trying to get closer to the revenue figures that we might have. So talk a little bit about that. If you'll kind of look at this sheet, the white sheet, you've got a copy of that with general purpose school 141. This version of our 14-15 budget, again, is $306,688,721 expenditures. The revenue figure, as best we can tell right now, is $293,859,003 in revenues. This makes us a budget shortfall of $12,829,718, which is $3,557,000 less than the previous version we talked about at that time. Several things are still unknown to us. I mean, we do not know exactly. We've talked about before state growth funds, and the state appropriates a pool of money to be divided among the school systems in the state with the highest percentages of growth. We do not know what we'll get this year. At one time, we go back 4 or 5 years ago, Rutherford County might be seeing, I think one of the highest you saw was almost $6 million. Typically, it had been somewhere from 3.5 to 5, somewhere in that range. This year, during the legislature and the governor's budget, he did shrink that pie. So when you start looking at for next year what's going to happen, our estimates are that probably if we have growth similar to what we've had before, our slice of that pie may go all the way down to about $1.5 million to handle growth. Another thing that you realize is growth funding from the state runs a year behind, the ADM and that sort of thing. So even though we had 1,140 new students this year, it takes a while for that to impact us. And the same thing is true for the county. Too, I might know with property tax, if somebody goes in a new house in February, basically their property tax are due January of the next year. So we're in the same situation when you're in a fast-growing area, and we as a school system are having a lot of students. Could be a year's lag, in revenues in that. So Jeff still does not know, and it's typically June before we'll know what they will give us this year for growth. Where will we be? Ours was about 2.9% in students, which was 1,140 in kind of that third month when we did the calculation. What percent did you tell me Williamson County was this year?
4.76.
So Williamson County, even though they have 20-something thousand students, so their growth actually came out to 4.76. And there's inherently something not totally fair about sharing growth funds when you only look at percentages of growth. Because, you can, if you have a small number and you have some growth, your percentage is going to be higher even though it's not as many students. So all of that goes into it. So when we talk about $293,859,000 revenues, we don't know what that June figure is going to be. We still, at this point, do not know exactly what the ending fund balance might be, because, again, to get your expenditures really in place to see what's left, what we get from this growth monies and all. So it's a best guess estimate for us at this point, very similar to what Lisa Nolan is seeing there. So as we say in this second paragraph, we may see some other small increases before June 12th. If business tax comes in better than we think, that would help a little bit if it happens. So our targeted shortfall between revenues and expenditure needs to wind up at $11,600,000 or lower. The deficit spending, basically, well, I can say deficit, but the idea of rolling over part of your ending fund balance to pay for your current year started really back when we opened the 2 middle schools. And at that particular time, because of the startup cost, and the county did some of this too. The county had some that they used some of the ending fund balance. We had a good year to use some of that for the next year. But in doing that, that's really monies that you can't spend. It's monies on paper, but it's a deficit number when you're rolling, of course, ending fund balance. Went up a little bit again last year, The figure you've been seeing in the paper, Ms. Nolan said like we rolled over something like 10.4. We had a couple of things that's closer to 12 million because one was the insurance change. We had to go back and make an adjustment. Textbook thing adjustment we did this year's insurance the year before.
Right, yes.
Textbook thing. We also had the $93,000 chiller that we had to replace. And Gary was telling me we have a brand of chiller that now, because of their age and all, one of these was at Blackman Middle. We have 4 more of those. So every time one of those goes out, or if we replace them, it was $93,000 was the bid the other day on that. So those things come into our figure, and so it's closer to 12 million. Personally, I just do not think we need to go any deeper than that. In fact, we need to try to go the other way to get out of this and get some of that paid back to where we're not trying to carry so much forward. Your percentages are not high out of a $300 million budget, but we still don't need to do that. We need to try to work our way back out of this as we possibly can. The other issue, kind of talking about some of the things that we're beginning to see, as we talk about revenues, one of the things I guess that the difficult for the public to understand, because they're reading about all the growth and how many people are coming in. You know, typically when we take a look at this and we talk about the growth, the average property tax, when you take a look at Rutherford County and the property taxes involved, most people's property tax will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 to $1,200. We know that the Rutherford County share of a new student coming into our system of that $8,100 or $8,011 is about $5,000. You know, when you start looking at some of that. So growth by itself doesn't pay for itself. It takes the sales tax and everything that we put in on that for that to happen. So that's another piece that we have to look at. This year, the state report card, the only one that's out now, and that would be through 12-13, because we haven't completed 13-14. If you remember earlier from the year, Rutherford County was spending $1,280 less than the state average. So in essence, when you stop and think about it, $1,280 less than the state average per student. 41,000 students. You as a board and my predecessor and others before, that would be over $50 million higher budget if you just even were spending the state average. I brought you something earlier in several months ago now that we talked about. Actually went back and looked at the rate in 2001 and 2. The system per pupil expenditure was $1,065. Went through and looked up the inflation rate from U.S. Department of Labor, and the inflation rate's 31.6%, compounded, of course, which inflation does, from 2001 or 2. And that says if we just spent inflation rate alone, an increase, would have been 31.83. And well, let me. I made a mistake a while ago. 5,000 is the state portion. 3,000 is Rutherford County's portion. So 3,127 is what we actually spent locally. So we actually spent $56 less per student last year in 12-13 than what we would have spent had we just kept up with inflation. As I said at that time, lots of efficiency things in place. You put in place the monitors for electricity to turn the lights off. We've gone to more geothermal as we have expanded to do that. In fact, the budget this year not showing increases in utilities. It says something for itself that what we budgeted last year, even with a cold winter, was able to hold that, and we think we can hold it, for another year. So we just really want the commissioners and the public to understand that we're trying to be as astute as we can in this. I think you've done a good job of looking over it and doing that. I've been talking with the principals the last few days, and high school principals yesterday and all, and it's going to be a tight budget year. To explain to them, what does that mean? What are we talking about? And as we look at the budget tonight, you're going to see some of that. The other issue is roughly 82 to 83% of our budget is personnel. And that's the business we're in. I mean, it takes teachers and bus drivers and custodians and all of the other, close to 47 to 4,800 total employees, full and part-time, and 82 to 83% of that. So when you talk about where is your money going to come from when you start cutting, it's going to be some people. You just can't cut the utilities much. Very difficult to cut. We did take some out of textbooks in anticipation, but there's not a lot of other areas that you can take it from. So it's going to affect your number of people, and they understand that. They're somewhat used to it, although we do not really like that. The budget you're seeing tonight, with the 1,140 students we grew this year, was about a plus 2.9%. The budget that you're seeing in front of you now is an increase of about 2.4%. And I'll say to you, you can't do this very long. You can't grow a student population of 2.9% and increase your budget by 2.4% without getting into the meat of the budget itself. You can't do all the services that you did once upon a time. That starts showing up very, very quickly. Reminder, there's some other unfunded mandates this year that the state hands down to us. Remember, the response to intervention, the RTI squared, the new method whereby you identify students for special education. It's for regular education. That particular piece required a universal screener that's nationally normed. They haven't given us any monies for that at all. That becomes local responsibility to come up with that. We're implementing that in grades really K through 8. We've put off the high school for a couple of years there. We have a new student management system this year. That wasn't our choice either. The old student management system went out of existence. STAR after this year, will be no longer. So the state bid out several of vendors for that. Basically, we chose the cheapest. To tell you the truth, it's not the one that was most chosen. We chose STI, which we think is adequate for us. Saw something the other day, and the Skyward, which is another one we talked to you about, which is one Musburg City uses. More systems actually chose that than STI, but it costs more. So again, we try to choose whatever we can do to fund that. Another thing that has happened to us, as I kind of continue with some of the challenges, when I talk about the TASER and the Fox Index, what I'm speaking of, and you're somewhat familiar with this, it's considered, the state uses these figures to consider a system's ability to pay based upon the wealth, whatever they consider the wealth of that county. The TASER's been in place for many years. The Fox systems kind of comes out of UT. It's a little bit newer system. Our preliminary estimates is, because of revisions in this, right now, 50% of our funding, state ability to pay, has come from TASER, 50% from Fox. Jeff is beginning to estimate we may get about $250,000 less than what we've been getting. What the state is basically saying, that they feel that Rutherford County has the ability to shoulder more of the responsibility. We have no control over that. Can't do anything about it. Talk to your legislator. That's all I can say there. Actually, an interesting thing, Jeff found out Williamson County may lose up to $3 million under this. I did read from our director's update that there is a committee meeting this summer to determine, the Department of Education and Commissioner Huffman is trying to say, can we go to one system to the other? Can we just go all TASER, or can we go all Fox? I don't know what that committee will recommend, The newest system is the Fox and is tended over the years to move a little bit more towards the Fox as they got up to the 50-50 point. So I'm not sure that will be real friendly to Rutherford County, but that's in the future, and we don't have that crystal ball, but it's out there before you to look at. As I said earlier, the 12 million that we're kind of carried forward goes back some 5 years to the 2 middle schools that were built. We have not purchased portables since Laverne Lake opened, and that was, I looked it up, it's 2007. Now, we've been moving portables around, and kind of like pawns on a chessboard. Some of them are so old, I can remember some of them at some schools that have been there as long as I can really just about remember. Mr. Jernigan, some of them are in place that when you were principal of those schools still there, or when you worked there at Thurman Francis, some of those were there then. It cost us, and I'll let Gary give me the figure. What is the figure to move a double wide portable and with the hookups and all to do that?
Be from 12 to 28,000.
From 12,000 up to 28,000 just to move one that you own. If you purchase a new double wide, some of the latest, I know you see some of the bids for that. What does that run?
Time you get it set up and everything, can be as much as 60,000.
For a single even. A double would be more than that, wouldn't it? The last prices.
Yeah,
a little bit more.
An average.
Yeah.
Average is somewhere, like Gary's saying, maybe up to
Yeah.
$60,000 to if you have to buy another double wide. I really do not want to go into that. I don't want to go back into that. For people that are listening to us today, what are we doing about it? We opened Stewart's Creek High this year, and really per square foot, one of the best that I've seen. Our cost with that. At the current time, that we're adding on to Blackman Middle. We're adding on to Smyrna Primary Elementary with additional capacity. And the commission approved not long ago the additions to Eagleville School. So we're at this time trying to add, and of course, anytime we can add to a building, that certainly saves us some money because you do not have to rebuild all the core facilities. If your core can stand it, and you have cafeteria space and some other things like that meets state requirements, then that's a cheaper way for us to go. But you cannot grow 1,140 a year. Now, we're trying to work some estimates for next year, and it's an unknown because we went from like 500 and something when the economy was lowest a couple of years ago up to the 1,140 this year. I'm not seeing a slowdown in building anywhere. When I look at the number, yes, sir.
I just got the 8th month from Ms. Dean.
Okay.
I'd better bring it back up, I'm sorry.
40,920.
Yeah,
The newest report, 40,920.
yeah.
If you
Okay.
multiply that times 1.03, which is 3%, you're looking at 1,230 kids.
We're looking anywhere from 12 to 1,400 if we grow somewhere in that range, which would be more than this year, but I think that very well may happen.
And our numbers have held
The numbers have held this year. The percentages of growth has held throughout.
and slightly
This year.
increased.
So, and we do not really, we haven't budgeted to purchase portables. We really don't want to go back to purchasing portables. If we're surprised. And remember, I think it was about 2006 or so, something like over 1,600 new students that year. If we were to see a surprise like that, we're in trouble. That's the bottom line. You might wind up having to buy portables if something like that happens, just to accommodate your people. Now, what happens when you cut the budget like we're talking about tonight? Again, when 82 to 83% of your budget is personnel, some of the changes you start seeing is class size tends to go up some, folks. And one of the very tough things for us, when we're required by state law under penalty to have 1 to 20 in a K through 3 classroom, in so many of our schools, we've had so much growth over the years that the ratio is all like already 1 to 18.8 or something like that. So it's not when 20 more children come in sometimes. Sometimes a half a dozen can come in and you're going to have to employ another teacher to meet the pupil-teacher ratio. So that's why you very often have to budget more teachers into your budget. A figure we typically use is something like 1 to 22 for budget purposes. You take a look at our numbers, we'll do something like 1 to 22, and 1 to 22 kind of just handles your simple growth possibly. So you realize that all of your career and technical education, your middle high school career and technical education is a 1 to 20 ratio. K3 is 1 to 20 ratio. 4 through 5 is 1 to 25. Your high school, you can go up to 30 in some of those classes to do that. But we've just found over the years, because we do not have reserve capacity, somewhere in the 1 to 22 range seems to be a good way for estimation, budget-wise, to do that. You've already cut 2 buses out. Roughly, we know that around 50% or a little better of the buses of students' growth will ride a bus. And that's historically, you can kind of look back and see that. So you know, with the number of buses, we had 8, we're down to the 6, and the 6 includes 1 special ed bus in that, so 5 transit buses. So if we go by 1,200, you know, you got growth, you got at least 600. It's hard sometimes to maintain about 100 per bus or so. We run double routes and all like that. So what happens? Buses run more double routes. It takes a little bit longer for kids to get home. They get picked up a little bit earlier in the morning. It's a little bit more crowded on the bus. There are real issues that come when you start cutting the budget. I guess one of the most painful things tonight for me to see and look at this, and Jeff, because even after the governor cut everything out for 2%, the budget that you kind of saw last, we left 0.75% in there. You know, that let's try to do something for our employees who do so much and put in so much time to do it. I mean, it makes a difference when you show them that you care about it. I will have to say to you tonight, basically that 0.75%'s gone. Again, you cannot maintain with the numbers they're asking us to come to. You can't do the 0.75% raise and do it. That's a large amount for us. You know, when we look at that. So it's a bare bone budget. Let's go back to the white sheet and let me talk about some of these other changes if I can in looking at it with you. And the first thing I just said, the 75 hundredths or 3/4 overall raise has been changed to a minimum of 120 step raise to offset some of the medical insurance increase. What we have held in place for our teachers, we did not, the law doesn't require it, but we did not take away the step increases for teachers. That if you're another year, this is you're supposed to earn that, you know, our commitment is to try to let them earn that. I mean, I think that's they expect it, they planned on it, we need to do it. So what we've looked at is we think the insurance, the family insurance and some of the costs looks like it's going to be maybe up around $120. So we have left in place if somebody doesn't get a step increase. We've got people that are 25 years and 28 years and 30 years and their insurance is going to go up too. So we've tried to at least leave $120 in there so that for the insurance increase that they're probably going to face. So that's kind of in there too. You know, try to do that. So coming back from that 310 million you saw, 10 more positions, 6.5 teachers, 1 maintenance. Maintenance didn't add anybody last year. They'd asked for 2 positions this year. They have to pick up Stewart's Creek High. We're in the 2nd year out, you know, from that now. So there's still 1 maintenance position. We had the half position accounting we talked about starting in December because of the new retirement. You know, they had to choose the plan for the retirement, that new people coming in and all dealing with that. We've taken that out. Hopefully we can handle it some way or another. Another transition teacher, another transition EA. We were able to do that because we found out within the last week that special education actually was able to get a grant. They didn't expect it because it was somewhat of a renewal grant. So that, again, will be covered by a grant in the special education teacher transition and EA. We did put in there initially in the earliest budget 5 additional days for principals. And we did that because they're working so much of the year. Some do 12 months now. But we were at, what, we're 230, Jeff? You know, so basically that's gone. We had in there initially for our 25 elementary principals, maybe up to 3%. We're having elementary principals now that are electing to apply for assistant principal positions in high schools and middle school because it's 4% different, something like that. 15% from 11 to 15%, because the buck stops on your desk when you're a principal. You're responsible for all this evaluation. You're having to do all of that, and there's not any spread there. That's been taken out also. You stop and look at that. We have left 3 raises in, just tell you up front, other than step raises for teachers. You know, again, if you get that year's experience, it's still
And classified.
if it's within the pay scale that we've had all along, you know, basically to do that. We left 3 in. The attendance operator back there, Mary Howell, basically, she, with the new system that we've got coming in, the training that's taking place, the extra hours we've sent her to training, we're doing that we felt we need to remunerate somebody because the skill level has definitely changed, much higher. Remember, the attendance system's how we earn our money. Everything now, we used to do it on paper, but if you do not get it entered and entered to where it'll count with your scheduling and all, then your ADM drops and you lose money for every one of those. We did leave the instructional technology coordinator. That's Mr. Trey Duke, who, I mean, you've heard and saw heard him in his presentations. It's doing the RTI squared. That was a big change that we're doing. That's the new mandate, plus he still has all the STSs to oversee and all of the instructional technology pieces. So we felt that it. And the third person is maintenance director, Mr. Curley. Basically over there and looking at that because of he was emailing and calling me at home last night with the thing at 7, 8 o'clock. He had gone out to Blackman Middle to see what's the temperature, what it is, and dealing with that. And so, I mean, it's weekends, it's night, 46 schools now, plus numerous buildings at those schools. And we've got, the other day you got the number of square feet that we're talking about in this system. We just felt because they've kept the work orders down and done so much, you know, when you get to a point and you're the leader, you know, there's no more steps or anything for you there. So, I mean, this is basically the 3, not hiding anything. We had talked about, and I know this is a heartfelt thing for you to look at, Mr. Blair. Our nurses stop basically at the 15th year. So as we were planning the budget, we said, surely we can pay our nurses for 16 years, and somebody's got more than 16 years. You know, we could do something about that. Let me chase a rabbit here a minute. This happened yesterday. You may not know. We actually had a student yesterday that was in kind of the field day outside at John Coleman, and his heart stopped beating. Whether you know that or not. They called code blue on the student, and the SRO rushed there, the nurse rushed there. They had to use the AED defibrillator that we a few years ago placed in schools for use. He went to Stonecrest, Vanderbilt. He did have a heart attack, 5th grade. He is going to have it. He's alert and talking to people now. He's going to have a valve replacement, is basically what we're being told. So you think nurses are not important, you know? Ask those parents. And we don't have one full-time at every school. You know, that's where we are. So in the budget you see basically today is there's 2 nurse positions in there. One of those is because we had to add additional nurse this year, because of the requirements of the services, whatever that student has. In some cases, by law, we have to add somebody to be there full-time. And we had 1 growth, started out with about 3, Mr. Blair. But again, to try to get these numbers, that's another personnel thing that you start losing. I hate it. Another thing that we took here, we were looking at our new budget plan where, the state stopped their salary for teachers, at the 15th year, basic 16th year, 11th year, they did, 11th year. Need to go back now. 11th year, and we said we're going to build in our, pay teachers at the 16th year, 21st year. So one of the things that we had tried to do is to see, well, everybody between 21 and 25, let's compact that back and pay them at 21 because there's not one after the 21. And so we built some things in there to do that compacting, and we're not going to be able to fund that compacting. In other words, we can't get ahead. We're going to try to stick to it and pay what we did pretty much with our schedule before, but we can't compact it. We're not going to be able to move that up for those. Another thing that we have found, the next year for math, which is one of our most expensive adoptions that we have, our plans are now to go to integrated math for high school math. Integrated math combines Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry into one book. And as a math teacher, my initial thoughts, no, I really like Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, but I stopped and began to think and consider, and talking with our other people that are teaching now, the most difficult subject, or one of the most difficult subjects for a high school student is now Algebra 2. So the integrated math allows you to take the concepts in Algebra 2 and teach them over integrated 2 and integrated 3. The other integrated portion in this over 3 is geometry. So you start blending in geometry more with Algebra 1, and geometry sometimes is the application of the algebra concepts that you're learning. Europe and many places in the world have done this for a number of years. This is not a new experiment out there. It's been in places in the United States, been in places, like I say, in Europe and others that have actually done somewhat better in math than we have. We think it'll be better for Rutherford County, but we've got to phase it in. And by that I mean, if a student had Algebra 1 this year, you couldn't throw them in integrated math because it would be different. You're going to have to they're going to have to finish out Algebra 2 and Geometry. So it's going to take about 3 years. Next year's math adoption, but it'll take about 3 years. So we think that we can take about $500,000 out of that textbook adoption here. Now, what that does is kick the can down the road. Fully understand that, because you're going to have to buy integrated 2 in a year that's not a math adoption. And you're going to have to buy integrated 3 in a year that's not math adoption. But it does allow us to try to balance this, and hopefully they come in a year when maybe the textbook expenses are not as great. I did read also in my director's update that the commissioners meeting as part of the changes with the textbook, and so the 6-year adoption cycle in Tennessee, a committee is going to be meeting. They're looking at what is the sequence? Are they going to change the adoption sequence? Are they going to change the adoption time of how long a book will be held and used? I don't know. That's meetings for this summer and will come out probably next fall. But again, that's $500,000 there. Cut capital outlay, $75,000 to $50,000. Other items are just miscellaneous between $5,000 and $20,000. Another thing that we've done, we've adjusted the years of experience budget for new classroom teachers. We typically, we have to, again, Jeff does a good job of trying to come up with an estimate. How much money is it going to take when you add 50 teachers, 60 teachers, 70 teachers? Boy, it wasn't very many years ago we was adding over 100 teachers for some of these. But we've been using something like BS in 3 is kind of a good average. He feels that maybe he can go to maybe a BS in 3 or something like that. Maybe because in recent years, what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, we've actually hired more just BS and zero beginning teachers and that sort of thing. And also, I mean, this does nothing to no one other than our estimate of the cost for hiring the teachers. So it's a paper change, but it does help you in some way at expense with the numbers that you're doing there. And so I think the next page mostly will be some motion and things that we've got to do to kind of clean up. But I think we're ready now basically to take a look at the budgets. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
I think so. If you'll get out your 2 sheets for the budget, let's take a look at that. The total number of position increases we have right now for teachers is 62.1. One of the things that we know roughly, and Jeff mentioned this at our last budget meeting, someone asked the question, just as a reminder again, when we hire a new teacher into Rutherford County, how much of it's state, how much of it is Rutherford County pay? Since we pay more than the state average, and in fact, most school systems in the state of Tennessee pay more than what the state minimum required is, roughly 51% of a new teacher's hire is going to have to come from local moves. Well, if we're not getting increases in property taxes and sales taxes, or we're not getting in the others, then that becomes money you're going to have to account for somewhere else in the budget. That leads to some of the other cuts you've had to make, so you can build in enough of those 51% pieces to handle 1,200 new students, if that's what the number comes out to be. So again, we're trying to give a best estimate in doing that. Looking down through there, if you remember some of the ones that probably caught your eye, the psychological personnel 2.0, and our issue here was some of these were original ARA funding, and also is people that are already working, people are already there, they're not new. We're having to switch it from federal to general purpose school fund budget, or you have to do, or you're into having to trying to stay out of any kind of layoff or anything with that. Again, the medical personnel, Mr. Blair, those nurses too. One we already employed this year because we had to do it, and it just falls into place next year. The other one is growth. We have 2 assistant principals in. I can tell you basically what we had looked at for those 2, if we can hold that. One of them was Stewart's Creek High. We typically have 4 assistants in a high school. Last year with their 1,300 and something students, we felt they could start with 3. Their numbers, preliminary numbers for next year is over 1,600, 1,603 or something like that, if that holds out. So that would be that extra position. The other position we looked at was at Blackman Middle School, because the wing that comes in over there is apart from the other. It's that middle school, 6th grade academy that we talked about. So that's possible that we're going to have to do one there. The educational assistants there, the 3.4 positions are ESL and SPED. Basically what we're looking at. Our ESL numbers go up every year. And for the public that may be listening to us tonight, Rutherford County has the 3rd largest English language learner population in the state of Tennessee, behind Memphis and Nashville. Nashville first, Memphis, and then Rutherford County. With the growth and the building, that tends to grow some. The ratio is, Mr. Zago, you may have to help me. Is it 1 to 45 or 1 to 40?
1 to 40.
1 to 40 is the ratio. We're supposed to have an ESL teacher for every 40 students served under ESL. And ESL determination is done by testing. Basically, you do a screening with the student, what's their first language, what's the language spoken in their home, and then they actually take a test and you make an assessment. And if they fall within that, then under guidelines, they're called ESL. So that tends to grow a little bit. Will we have enough there? I don't know. I think that's, you may have to dip into your teacher positions to cover that. That may be something we have to do. But that's not unusual for us. The one maintenance personnel is still down there. You see that in line 167. And there's 2 positions down there in other salaries and wages, 189. One of those is our data person, Kevin Whittington. The one person that we did was Race to the Top. Since that's expiring, we have to pick that salary up. And I don't recall what the second one is. Do you remember?
An autism
Autism.
position that is also federal.
It's a federal, autism position that we're having to roll over. So let me hush a minute and give you a chance to look at it and ask questions. And again, you have the large breakdown, but the summary sheet is basically the top sheets that we have here, those four.
How would you, just looking at your custodial there, how would you drop a half a position?
One of the schools wanted to trade in a half-time custodian for educate EA hours.
Jeff has a formula for custodian that's based upon the square feet in the building. Sometimes we take into account the age of the building and how you take care of it and that sort of thing. I think most of your principals will tell you it's insufficient, you know.
That was a half-time position that was unfilled for quite some time, and then we're having difficulty filling it.
Yeah.
Had a half-time educational assistant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the building was kept clean, and we're trying to fill it.
I'm glad our principals are thinking about teaching and learning, aren't you? Yes, sir?
This is shades of Doris Jernigan, keeping this wagon rolling. Is there any way to find out of this almost $2 million, which is the trustees'
Yes.
commission, how much of that goes back into the general budget?
Between, my recollection from last year, between 85 and 90% of it goes back in the county general budget.
So basically, we send it back.
We pay it to the county trustee, and then in the budget process, it's moved to help fund county budget.
Most people listen to you don't know why you're asking this question.
Right.
You may want
Well,
to,
it's
you've
just
learned
that,
over the years.
We're paying out of our budget, almost $2 million to the trustee, who then will keep the amount of that to run his office, and then the rest of it goes back into the general
Yes,
budget.
sir.
By state law.
By state law.
It's not the
Yeah,
trustee's choice
Right,
to
right,
do
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Nor
I-
ours.
No, I don't wanna.
He's not withholding
yeah,
more
I
than
don't-
state law
Yeah, I
tells
don't
him
wanna
to.
besmirch
That's
Mr.
not
Beatty,
Yeah.
he's a great
No,
man.
he is.
But, there should be some way we can recover those funds back into our budget.
You realize how much 80% of 2 million would do in teachers?
Yeah. and-
Think about that a minute.
I mean,
How many positions you're talking
surely
about.
there's a vehicle we can use, or a resolution, or just ask our funding body, say, listen, guys, give us back what the trustee's office doesn't need. We desperately need this money. Mr. Odom, by far, this is more than a bare bones budget. I don't know that I've ever seen one in this tight. I mean, I'm looking across the board, and, there's no changes, no change, no change, no change, and here we've got a 2.9% student population increase, and we're just not doing. I don't see any enrichment, intervention, for a county whose free and reduced continues to increase, and and the English language learner continues to increase. It's just perplexing.
So we've still got some of the positions in place to try to help in that 62 and to do some of the RTI, to do some of the interventions there. So we still have some of that in place. It's just the right thing to do about kids. So that's another reason why you can't necessarily just divide 22 into ever how many students and come out with the exact number, because at the same time, you've got those interventionists. And again, another unfunded mandate, you gotta do the response to intervention. They even, they even tell us how many additional minutes we have to do for tier 1, tier 2. Tier 1 is everybody, tier 2 and tier 3. That's how many additional minutes. Tier 2 can be done in the classroom by the classroom teacher. Tier 3 has to be somebody else. I mean, it could, in some cases, part-time special ed. Other cases, it has to be somebody that serves as an interventionist. And so in some cases, what we have done, we've had an interventionist for several years now, one math and one reading in our middle schools. Because back many years ago, rather than calling them Title I's, Mr. Watson's time and all, we decided interventionists, and specifically intervening for math and for reading, would be very beneficial to us to do that. So we've just repurposed those. I mean, they're not even new positions. We just, instead of calling you that, now you're now an RTI interventionist. So in every case where we could in doing that, that's what we've done. We're actually next year, one of the things that we're training teachers now, some people in our high schools to teach reading in high schools. When you get 1,140 new students or more, and they coming from everywhere, and a number of these may be 14 years old and 16 years old, and they haven't been in school for a while. Remember, some of the best students, nicest students that we're getting have been some of the Karen students that came from Burma, and have been a large population of those in our Smyrna area and all. These kids are already teenagers very often when we get them. Some of them haven't been in school in 6 or 7 years. And you can't take a TCAP test or an EOC test when you can't read. So we're actually in the process now of training some teachers to do more specialty work in teaching reading, even in the high school. It's still the right thing to do about students. Our job is one of education. And we do not get to pick and choose. And so when students come to us that have a need and need to learn, our goal is to teach them as best we can.
Mr. Chairman, when we have our joint meeting here in the next, I guess, couple of weeks,
27th, I believe.
I certainly would like to engage those committees in the conversation about the access of the trustees commission. Some way to utilize those dollars back into our budget rather than back into the general budget. So,
Let me throw this at you. Talked to Mr. Oldham earlier. We're gonna go ahead and if this goes through the board tonight, Mr. Oldham and I work together on a draft letter, basically outlining some of the things we're doing here, and we can incorporate that in there if you want us to.
yes, sir, please.
Within the letter to raise that question.
Yes.
If that's okay.
It would be with me if it's okay with the rest of the board.
Okay. Mr. Young?
My concern is, like Mr. Oldham said, we're here to educate the children, and I'm afraid we're doing an injustice here with the budget by not supporting these kids and the teachers to do their job.
I'm with you.
Well, and since we're just talking in general on this, and I appreciate the job Mr. Oldham did, and Mr. Sandvig, in trying to get the thing cut down to something that they can try to work with. But what concerns me, we're talking about 1,200 kids next year. I'm more concerned 1,500 kids, because I'm out in it for construction every day, and I know what's going on. And building and all that right now is probably better than it's been in a long time. And we're looking at 302 this year. We're looking at going to 306.7. Okay. let's take 1,500 kids at 8,000 a pop. You're probably talking about $12 million, okay? In growth money, I believe, if I'm correct, Mr. Sandvig, you probably get 1.6.
Yes, sir.
Let's just round it to 2 million, so you're back to 10 million that you want, have an expense of. That it's an additional expense. I mean, it's not a reoccurring deal, but that's what concerns me. You're going from a 302 to 30, let's say 307. You got 5 million, you know, we're still in the hole. But Mr. Oldham feels like, you know, we can work with it, so. It bothers me, but I don't know what else to do. Mr. Eakes?
3 comments. 1.5 million behind each year if you talking about 2.9 increase in students and 2.4 increase in funding. You fall behind 1.5 million the first year. Now the next year, you're already behind 1.5, but you're going to fall behind 3 million the next year. So now you're 4.5 million behind. So you never catch up if you fall into this pit. Social workers, you have 4 for 40,000 students. The need is greater.
In federal.
Pardon?
We have social workers and psychologists in
Okay.
federal projects
Okay, so
also.
psychologists.
Yeah.
So I missed that. How many are we talking about there?
Those, they don't show in this
Okay.
budget, Mr. Eakes, but
Is that a total of 4?
in this budget, yes, sir.
Okay, a total of 4 people dealing with the problems of 41,000 students. That's not, I mean, they're talking about 10,000, potential 12,000. It just, to me, it doesn't seem feasible that they can address. And I know that part of what the school system does is takes kids, families to court to make them come to school. And you need support in order to do that. And that, you know, that entails many times drawing on those resources from social work, psychology, psychologists and social workers mainly. And I would guess that you're employing BS social workers. Am I a BS in social work? Are we talking master's degree or
Most of them have to have a master's to get there.
master's degree for their work in the school
Simply
system?
because of
Okay.
state requirements to get there.
And the other thing is, our funding mechanism is old. Has it changed any recently to your knowledge? It's pretty much the same thing we've lived with all our life. But our education needs change month to month. You know, it's like taking your car in. Now, you used to get under the hood of your car and repair it because it was so simple. There was space under there to get to things. You could change a water pump, you know, you could do those kind of things. You can't do that now because the engine has become so complex. Same's true with our education system. We can't continually fund our education system with an outdated mechanism that says, no, this is the way we've done it. We can't raise any taxes. We can't look for other funds. So we're stuck. And Mr. Young hit it right on the nose. We can't do our job. And maybe, you know, I don't know who would do the job if it's not done by this
Guidance
group.
counselors are having to do some of it too. I mean, when you deal with that.
Oh, yes,
our
yes.
guidance
Yeah, we do have
counselors-
guidance counselors in each school.
We do, they do that, so they help us some with that.
And they are sort of a beginning resource, I would guess. They're an initial interviewer. They will pass on, as the children need more assistance, they'll pass that along. But it just seems to me that we're falling behind. We're hesitant to catch up because that implies making some type of change to the funding mechanism.
Just checking in our federal projects, we have 9 social workers, additional social workers, and 10 psychologists, or vice versa. So we do have some other resources, but those are for our special ed population.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I got a couple questions here. And probably for Mr. Sandvig more is like, our fund balance, are we okay there? I mean, isn't it supposed to be like 3%?
We're going to have to watch that very carefully, and that, once we close out May, I've looked at it, but once we close out May, I will be able to get an estimate. I think at this point, we will be able to come up with 3. We really, especially because we are relying on fund balance, Lisa and I are more comfortable with 4, 4.5, 5%.
We're not gonna have that.
But what
I
does
don't
the
think-
state require us?
3.
3, okay, I just want to make sure we were right on that. Now, Mr. Odom, the class size ratio, you touched on it earlier. Can you tell us again what all of the K through 12 or
The K through 3 is 1 to 20.
1 to 20?
Now, the way the state calculates that, you can have 22 in one classroom in the K3 grades taken collectively. But offsetting that would need to be an 18 or something. So when it's an average of how many students are in K through 3, how many teachers are in K through 3 divided, and it's got to be less than 1 to 20.49. They round up. you know.
Okay,
So if you got 20 and a half, then you have to have,
all right.
you'd have to have the other. And then in your 4 through 6, that's 1 to 25.
1 to 25.
And basically your 7 through 12 is 1 to 30. Your career and technical education is also 1 to 20 ratio, which has to be.
Now, you had touched on it in some of our previous meetings. What is the penalty if we cannot meet that, if we don't have enough teachers?
If you don't have enough teachers, the penalty is from $55,000 to around $70,000 per class period. For a high school, it could be, one teaching position there could run it over, and I guess when I say again, what can happen when you get really tight on your teachers, another thing that can happen is a little bit like college. We've having a lot of students that take CTE, sometimes freshman year too. What happens when you can't fill teaching positions with demand and the student has to take something else, you delay it for a year. It's kind of like you go to college. We got this many sections of this course. If you always wanted to get to register early so you could pick your time in your section. Sorry, you'll have to take it next semester. You could really find yourself in a situation, and sometimes in high school, hey, you're not going to be able to take this as a freshman. You're going to have to wait to start till you're a sophomore. Hope that doesn't happen, but I can just simply tell you, if you can't pour that teaching position, that's what you run into.
Right. Now, that class period, is that per day or per month, per week?
It would be, when we do the preliminary report, which is typically in October, and everything has to be clear before January, it would be, that's the year penalty, but you still have to correct it. You're still gonna have to turn around. You can't let it go on. You can't
Right.
pay a penalty and do it. They still make you correct it. So I don't know any school system in the state of Tennessee that did a penalty. I mean, it's about the same cost as a teacher. So it just doesn't pay to go there.
But I mean, if we get real critical on teachers,
We're gonna have to hire teachers, folks.
then we'll have to hire teachers quickly.
You're gonna have to hire teachers.
Yeah.
And if that messes up your 3% ending fund balance, or whatever it is, you're gonna have to hire teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, under the law, we're gonna have to hire teachers. That's the bottom line.
Our teachers overnight is not a really.
Not the best. No, not the best. But you just gotta do that.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at to the public, that, it's critical how we do things here. It's just, we just can't cut teachers just to be saving a dollar.
Yes.
I noticed on the instructional equipment, about 900,000 in that. Cut out, over $1 million from last year. Of course, I'm sure that was Stewart Creek. I've been giving that some thought. Instructional equipment, I don't know what you have in instructional equipment,
Mr.
but the most important instructional equipment of all is a good classroom teacher. So I was looking at that. Is it more important to put instructional equipment in, or is it more important to have a classroom teacher available to us?
Before you came, before you started, in that really, really early budgets, we had put about 900,000 to $1 million in. We received 2 million from the state, 2.1 from the state, one-time monies for computer upgrades, bandwidth, and nodes to receive, wireless access points and additional computers. Well, we've gone through the 2.1 million. We were being told at that time Park would have to be next year. Everybody's tested online, that sort of thing. So we'd put $1 million in there. When the state delayed basically that Park implementation online assessment, and I don't remember whether you was here or not when we talked about it, online assessment is coming, folks, because it's cheaper than hand graded. It's not going to be next year, but we know the future of education, just like it is at home with online banking and everything else, it's going to go there. But we were able to say that 900,000, when you look at teachers or you look at 900,000, it was kind of going to go to computers and stuff to do that. We did, I think, what you're telling us right now, that teachers are very important. And so it was really the monies related to prepare for the Park testing.
But we do have our technology funded
Yes.
at the same level, excluding the Park money. We have not cut that
We did
core
not
base
cut
level
what we
have
spent
had.
last year
We cut
for
an increase.
our normal technology
Yeah.
replacement. Although we're years behind in replacing, we didn't cut that. That's why you're seeing on most of these lines, there's no change in them. It didn't mean there's no increase, but there's no decrease. It's just very, very status quo.
But that 2 million, that was a one-time deal.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
And actually, the 302 million you mentioned, the 302 million that you mentioned included that 2 million one-time monies from the state. So in essence, our operating monies was closer probably to 300 million if you take that 2 million that the one-time governor came out. So that's what we're looking at. And just the calculation that you did, if you have 1,500 students and you're gonna need 12 million more, here we are putting 6.7 out there in place of it. And I fully expect, it'll take 2 years to show up in the report card, will not be $1,280 behind the state. Interesting, and I've got that figure in 2007-8, we were $998 behind the state average, and 2012-13, we're $1,282. So would not surprise me at all to see us to be 1,400 or 1,350 or something.
Well, discussions like we're having tonight and recommendations coming from the administration of the school system, this has been going on, this type of discussion has gone on for several years. That's exactly a result of those discussions and efforts is exactly why we're $1,200 behind the state average now. And, the product that's turning out is a pretty doggone good product.
Yeah. Our people work hard, our teachers. That's
They-
why I love to
Work hard,
try to pay them for doing it.
yeah. So,
And I guess in the public hearing us tonight, what is kind of the change on the revenue side for us this year? And the change on the revenue side is because of the reappraisal, if basically we choose to do the certified tax rate. And I read in the paper today, over half of the people saw a reduction in their assessed value. I found that hard to believe. I didn't experience that, but half of the people, that was at least what you, Mr. Broden, I think, had in the paper today. So the certified tax rate for people that are listening to us says that we set a rate to bring in the same dollars next year, as we did the previous year. Normally, what we as a school system can experience a lot of times is because Rutherford County is going quickly, then if we get X pennies on the tax rate, because we've grown so quickly in Rutherford County, there's more property to assess, so we'll get our share of that. So you have a built-in growth. But if you go back to the certified rate, we tend to lose a hefty amount of that growth money this year, which makes it a really unusual year. Sales tax has been good, and people, please keep shopping in Rutherford County. You know, that's helping us. So that piece is still out there some, but again, when one student in Rutherford County costs you over $3,000, and the property tax for the house is in what is being built is somewhere in the $800 to $1,200 range, the numbers do not match. Growth will not pay for itself by itself unless you get much more sales tax and business tax and other things to offset it.
A lot of those people didn't own open land, did they?
No.
Ms. Street?
Those 50%. Not a bit of. Children that didn't have to see theirs go up and around. Maybe that's the plan for next year, I don't know. But I think Mr. Jernigan hit right on top of the key issue. It's a great product. Our school system's a good system. One that everybody in the county should be proud of. First off, that would be my number one emphasis. Not our property tax value, not our shopping area, not even, if you will, our churches and houses of faith, but the fact that we're educating kids, that we are doing the greatest job that you can do is educate children. It pays off for eternity. And we're doing a very good job of it. And each year, as you say, we seem to be decreasing or increasing the difference in the state average and what we're spending here. So anyone who wants to suggest that this school administration is not cutting it to the bare bones, I would suggest that they look at the numbers and just see what other groups are doing with the same task ahead of them, how they're handling that task and how this group is handling that task.
If you like percentages instead of dollar amounts, in 2008-9, we were 0.2% behind the state spending. And in 2012-13, we were 1.1% behind state spending. So, I mean, it's the people before me and all, and you as a board have been extremely astute. And it kind of hurts when people say you haven't been. I mean, either everybody else in the state's messed up and spending too much, or we've been done a very good job at doing it.
Well, I can take absolutely no credit for what's been done because I've been here such a short time. But I can give you a great deal of credit for what you've done, and I think speak objectionably that y'all have done a great job in keeping that cost down. So I support you in that regard, and I praise you to everybody I come across. Hey, they're doing a good job.
Well, this is as frugal as I think we could ever present to our funding body, and unless someone has a suggestion of doing something different, I'm not sure that we would be ready for a recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
And that's on page 2, I think. Yep. The recommendation is that we take to the joint meeting, a budget for 2014-15 general purpose school budget of $306,688,721 in expenditures as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. Blair and a second by Mr. Nipper. Anybody have any further discussion?
And they're telling us this still doesn't match revenue now. I mean, you know that. They're basically saying the revenue is still not gonna match it, so.
Well, we'll be engaged in conversation.
I'm with you.
If we look at our past history, our budget has always grown by $14, $17, $18. It seemed like I saw those numbers somewhere. we're looking at now less than $13 million grown this year, so I
Well,
don't know, we could.
And even all the dollars are not local dollars. You know, another thing people don't understand, when you're saying we're going from, say, if you take the 300 and you go to 306.7, part of that is the state money if our ADM goes up because we get more students, that 49% or so that's gonna come from the state there is not local money. So it's not 6 million more of local monies that's involved in that. I mean, we're halving it, at least it's really the local part.
Anybody else? So we got a motion by Mr. Blair and a second by Mr. Nipper. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 2, Mr. Odom.
Number 2 is kind of an update for you on status of Vector County Alternative Pay Plan. This is information only for you. We will have to submit, and we'll bring this back to you in a subsequent meeting. It's very close to what we had before. Remember, the state was saying, again, that 11th year, we added the 16th, the 21st, the steps there. Another thing that we're probably not going to do was in our original plan, we were saying we not going to advance someone that scored a 1 or a 2. The legislature basically came out and detached that from licensure. They didn't affect the salary at all. I mean, you could still do what you want to, but I think we need to there's some litigation going on. So I think before we build, if there's any sanction or anything in it, we certainly need to let this play out, at the state level. So would not be in this. But basically, that's the proposed salary schedule that does include still the step raises for teachers in there. And if there wasn't a step for them, the $120 at least to do that. So we'll get back and continue to refine this with you and for you and bring it back in a meeting. We have to present it to the state sometime in June. Another thing that you realize that we had to do with state law, we had to submit a differentiated pay plan. It had to be a differentiated pay plan. That's one of the requirements under state law. And one of the things that helps us meet the differentiated pay plan of the items that they listed, one of them was when we talked about going to RTI, when we kind of put in the coach. When you took the coach and paid them for extra days, that before school starts, they look at the students coming into their school, can be prepared to meet with teachers about what are your really at-risk kids coming in here, and then work with them in that. By increasing their time, this became a differentiated pay plan. So we have to do certain things because that's the other test that it goes in is differentiated pay. So again, you figure a daily rate, and if they work 10 days longer, they get 10 days more pay. That's basically what it amounts to. But anyway, that's information for you. Capital projects. Jeff, you want to follow that one? Kind of tell us what we got there.
This really is just for information. There was a minor increase in the property tax projected. Part of that goes to the capital projects fund. So now instead of using, I'm thinking it was less than 20,000 to fund balance, we'll be proposing to increase fund balance by 14,582. Not enough money to cover another of our projects, so.
All right.
The centralized cafeteria fund, we're gonna present that to the June 12th. That's some interesting things connected with that. From your own self, going to the grocery store, price of food's up. They're asking us to serve more fresh foods, not processed foods. They are more expensive. When was the last time we had a lunch price increase?
4 years ago?
It's been about 4 years ago. I don't think we're gonna propose one this year, but what's happening to us, what's gonna happen here is if we're not real careful, we're gonna be supplementing your federal lunch program out of your GP lunch program. We're gonna run to the end of that. You're not gonna be able to continue that very long with that either. So at some point down the line, probably not this year, but next year, I fully think that's probably gonna have to happen. As part of my discussion with principals this week and for all of our high school people out there that have a sweet tooth. The federal regulation that's been in place at the middle and elementary is implemented in high school next year required. So sugar, candy's gone. Basically your potato chips and other things, if it's not a healthy snacks, are gone from the vending machines. I guess the biggest factor that we're seeing is the principals. The principals at the high school use their vending machine money to buy things for the schools. And you've been there as a principal, right? And it could be a pretty good little sum of money. For that's going to be reduced drastically. We're already seeing more kids, if they bring their lunch to school, they bring their Coke with them or something. We can't sell it to them. Not a regular Coke or something like that. So again, that's federal intrusion, but we have to do that to get our monies for federal lunch programs. So you may hear from some high school principals and people associated with it that the new federal regulations on being able to fund our school, how do you pay for golf and soccer? I mean, you can just do so much basketball and football, and we have so many sports, and it's wonderful. It's the hook that holds a lot of kids in school. It's the thing that we need to do, but I don't think people realize how very often principals subsidized all these other things going in their schools very often with that vending money, or that money for the copy machine for them and all. But they're going to be hurting. I can tell you now.
Mr. Sam, what do you anticipate, just on the cafeteria fund, what do you anticipate this year on that? Is it going to balance out, or?
Looking at April numbers, and that's one reason I wanted to defer until next month, because essentially, except for summer feeding, we will be through for the year, and I can give you better numbers. We will probably, as we budgeted, we will have some kind of a loss of using excess balance, but going to the recyclable or biodegradable paper products is expensive, and that's
going to cost us next year, correct?
And this year, yes, sir. Yeah, but I totally agree with Mr. Odom. I think next year we will be looking at an increase probably.
Go ahead.
What rule came down that said that we should go to those products? Why did we do that? If we knew that was going to cost us money, was there some law?
The reauthorization of basically this whatever they call the school nutrition law, it is written into law.
That we had to go to these products?
Yes, sir. That we had to go to products that meet these specifications. Yeah.
I guess the other issue is too, is a county issue with what percent of our products are going into the landfill.
Yeah.
We spent some money dealing with that. Mr. Clardy and his people, we have a recycle container at all of our schools, and the county's trying to do recycling, is single stream recycling. And we have to lock them up because people just come by on the weekend. If you throw something in there that's not, or liquids or something like that, and it destroys the whole canister. It's my understanding, and this has nothing to do with schools, my understanding the county is now having to pay for single stream recycling, that it is not. At one time, the idea was single stream recycling, that what you recycle would pay for the pickup and cover it. But even as a school system, we're now spending some of the maintenance monies on those canisters and those locks and the things to try to keep from that happening. And it's a difficult thing for us.
Well, and-
I know it costs money, either way you go, but recycling, washing dishes is a pretty good recyclable thing.
We do still, and most everything is still, if you go to a school, in most places, you're gonna still see the tray or the dish or something like that. If dishwasher goes down, we have them in stock to back it up. A few of the situations we get into high school where it's a little bit more broken down, the servings might be on those recycled, but still by and large,
Yeah.
Mr. Jernigan, I mean, we still use the dishwashers. I mean, really.
Well,
I
and-
know it costs to use dishwashers, labor and everything, but
And that's part of the problem. At times, if you have someone out,
really,
yeah,
what it comes down to, in my mind, and I don't mean to be crude about this thing, but I hate for us to use saying we're doing something like recycling, and it's costing our system $300,000 or more, of general school funds.
not of general school.
It's coming out of that. federal
Cafeteria
lunch
fund
program
for that
stuff.
aspect.
Well,
So,
if the lunchroom program is not paying and it's losing money,
Right, it will
And-
cost.
and, yes, sir.
whatever fund
Oh,
it comes
absolutely.
out of,
Yes,
it's
yes.
affecting
Yes.
other funds.
And when I first came here, we were paying the retirement and the medical insurance for all of the cafeteria staff out of the GPS budget. We ended that. We are not subsidizing that program, and we intend to do our best to keep it so we do not subsidize that program.
And kids were eating lunch for 65 cents a day,
Right.
you know.
You know, when they did away with no fried foods,
Yes.
we have to go in and we had to take from that fund, and you go in and take some really good equipment, which, you know, and pulled all that out so that you can bake more and do that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's again another,
Yeah.
the number of unfunded mandates would really
Yeah.
surprise people.
Yeah.
The regulations that
Yeah.
come down.
One of the issues that we face at a county-wide level, which is, I think, part of why Mr. Nolan was pushing different options, and not just for us, but countywide, we are going to incur a tremendous cost when this landfill has to be shut and another one open. And trying to do, part of his job, trying to prolong the life of this landfill as long as we can. So,
If we have to pay the tipping fee somewhere else,
yeah.
you
Mhm.
know, that would be a huge hit whenever that starts. We have some schools that do some wonderful recycling on their own, and
Yeah.
we've had some of them come in and do presentations here that are able to sell some of that paper. If the county's having to pay to haul it off, and they can collect newspapers and aluminum cans and then sell it and use it back at their school to help them survive, and their parents are bringing it in, we encourage them to do it. You know, because again, that's one less fundraiser they have to do. Because again, that federal regulation, you can't sell anything of the sugary snacks between
Midnight,
midnight and
30 minutes
30 minutes
after.
after the close of the school day. So from midnight to, if your school closes at 3:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon, you can't do it. Because principals were asking, what happens at the ball games at night? Right now, the regulation doesn't cover the football game or the basketball game as long as it starts 30 minutes after school's out. That's how
Anybody else?
fine-tuned it is.
Anybody else?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman.
You got anything else? Mr. Odom?
No, sir.
Any questions? All right, next time we meet, I think is next Tuesday, 4:30. Everybody remember that, I believe, 4:30. We'll try to get away at 5:30 for the ones going to graduation.
Is it Monday?
Is Monday?
Work session's Monday, board meeting's Tuesday.
Okay.
Is 4:30 4:30 is on Tuesday?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay.
And Monday is
Monday's a regular work session, regular time, 5.
5, thank you.
Yes, sir. If there's nothing else, we're adjourned.